Good morning and welcome back to the Hyrox coaching podcast. This morning we're going to talk about threshold training, go through the usual bits and pieces, race reviews, and then the actual meat of it. We'll have a look at wins of the week and then do some question and answers by finishing up. Morning, Chris, or afternoon to you.
Morning, mate. How are we?
Good, yeah, actually. Well, I say good. Still recovering from the weekend. I think my legs have taken a bit of a battering from racing this weekend, so I'm still trying to get back into normal mode with that.
You raced twice, didn't you?
Yeah, went stealing flags in the morning in the open and then did the pro doubles in the evening.
Very good.
It was a good 10 hours between them. But it was good. Yeah, I'll go through that in a minute once we go through Kavishia results. If you want to do the Vegas results first, then we'll roll through from there.
Happy to. Look, the results are probably the most important. So men's pro winner Jack Driscoll won that one. Time of 56.16. So we were talking about this offline that that's his now fourth win. So he's on, 420 points.
25.
Is that right? Yeah, 420 points. So,
yeah, 420. Yeah, 420.
Yeah. So probably the highest out of anyone, and now just has to get theoretically probably not even a win, maybe a second to pretty much guarantee himself a qualification for the first major of the next season. So whether he's deliberately gone about that or he's just raced and won the races he need to, but I think it probably presents certainly a strategy for people that, and obviously no disrespect to Jack, but he's not quite at that level of the top guys yet, but will certainly find himself pretty consistently in majors because, yeah, as I said, he only needs to win one more race, which I think just from a pure talent standpoint, I'm sure he will, and then from a tactical standpoint, you can certainly position yourself in a way that, you go and find a race the same weekend as one of the majors on, most of the top guys will be there. We've seen that with sort of Hugo in Gant and Turin. When the majors are on, a lot of the best races are going to be there. So good for him. He's going to secure himself a spot in the majors next year and probably lock that in because I don't think he'll ever drop out of the top 15 with 5 race wins. Obviously, could be proven wrong, but I'd be very doubtful that he ever would. So pretty much secures your spot to all the majors. And then obviously the race that a lot of people that were watching was the pro doubles. Obviously Hunter and Cole going for the world record. That was just a scoot short. I think it was probably not the course to do it. I don't think it was lightning fast, but they were very quick and just missed it. And I know they had a bit of fun. And then Rich Ryan and Lauren Weeks ran a mixed doubles, 50-21. So pretty blazing fast there. I think the third fastest time in history behind obviously the two teams that did it in Australia. So that race is 2 weeks before the American regional, so perhaps didn't have the big names racing in the solo, but it is what it is, but still some good results.
Yeah, and it's the depth there isn't too great again, is it? But probably because America's it's got a decent top level, I suppose. Then the depth drops off. Not like Europe where it's 20, 30 deep. I think you just see that from Kavishia on Saturday night in the men's pro. The lineup was ridiculous, and once again Thomas Tervik came away with a win. Strong win. So the course was nice, but it was another one of those too many lappers. I think nearly four laps on the first one and then 3 for the rest. So that kind of slowed the run down, but the rock zone was the smallest I've ever seen. So I suppose it evens itself out, but all the corners make it tricky. So his time of 55.04 is pretty impressive. The venue was pretty cool, which is nice, and it always, I think, plays well to being able to go pretty quick. And then an absolute pacing masterclass from Halliday again. He was, I don't know where he was going into the lunges, but probably 10th or 9th, something like that. And he lunged in 2:31 and then went unbroken on the wall balls, went and finished in second. So he just knows exactly how to pace it, and that back end for him is super solid. And then a really good result from the Frenchman Julien Card Salomon. I butchered that, but that's he's come in well there. He's beat some big names. I think Liam McCrory was just behind him, and then it had Martin Eindhoven. Who else was there? Richard Hynek. So there were some real big names in that top 10. So that's a really good result for him. So more points pushed out there as well, and they were all pretty tight at the top. I think there was maybe 6 or 7 in that 55 to 56 minutes.
Yeah. You'd have to say Thomas would be. You'd have to say Thomas the European.
Well, the other, I suppose, him versus Noble versus
Noble's already qualified. I'm saying to qualify.
Yeah, of course he has. Yeah.
Not to win. I'm saying the qualification.
So because there's one spot to go through. Yeah,
I
suppose so. Yeah.
Running and that. Like, he just seems in a good place with his fitness, so good on him.
Yeah, like in the women's race, Chloe Cook was super close to getting that sub 60 women's time with an hour and 4 seconds.
Yeah.
So she was pretty standout there. It's a pretty awesome result for her. I think that's quite a big PB. The doubles was pretty hot as well in the men's race. In fact, the women's race as well, is the top 2 teams are all been in that, or the top team for the women were Elite 15s, and then Holly Archer and Saskia were second, and it was close. They were hammering around, chasing each other around. And then in the men's race, Ollie and Ollie Frickers and Sean Noble were absolutely ripping around the course, closely followed by Harry Thompson and Luke Greer. So I think they were all expecting to get that sub 50 on the board, and I think the busy course and all the turns probably put an end to that. But and then I think the course was solid, but I think it was tricky to run really fast because of especially in the doubles, because you are running faster in the doubles, and a constant de-acceleration for the corners and acceleration really puts a stop to it. I think we saw that a lot in the grid format in the smaller courses in the elites, right, where they didn't, in Melbourne and the Hamburg, they didn't get really fast times in the doubles, where they got pretty fast times in the solos because they probably was a little bit slower running.
That's good. That'll be good. That European regional is going to be a ripper of a race. Absolute ripper. Very good. Should we get on to the crux of what we're going to talk about today, what everyone's been talking about this week by the looks of social media?
Yeah, threshold, isn't it? But we've been mentioning it for the last couple of weeks, dipping in and out of our threshold and talking about it. So threshold. I don't know, if you want to give your definition of what you think it is or what it actually is, and then we can talk around that and work through there if you want.
I suppose there's a lot of things, and perhaps it's maybe a little bit misunderstood, and there's probably some simplicity in it, but also a bit of complexity too. But I guess it's the maximum sustainable aerobic pace, basically, where lactate production and lactate clearance are balanced. Now that's obviously a little bit technical, but if you think about it, and there was a post that Jess Petro did, which was good, which is it's not a pace, it's a physiological state. So you can have your threshold output on any sort of aerobic type machine, running, rowing, biking, skiing. But physiologically, what's happening is basically when intensity starts to ramp up and you start to have more glycolysis or burning carbs, you're creating both pyruvate, and if your system can't aerobically deal with the pyruvate, that will then be turned into lactate, and then that lactate will then start to also cycle, and with that comes sort of hydrogen ions and that sort of that burning feeling. And while that's happening, so lactate can also be used as a fuel by all the slow twitch fibers, and there's obviously a point that the lactate and the pyruvate can be cycled sufficiently by the aerobic system so that fatigue doesn't accumulate too quickly. If you go over that, that's obviously when you get into that sort of VO2 zone. So most people say it's the maximum sustainable pace or speed or force that you can sustain for between 40 and say 70 minutes. I think obviously some well-trained athletes, and particularly probably people on the bike, can sustain threshold for a little bit longer, but rule of thumb, it's the maximum pace or output that you can sustain for that 40 to 70 minutes mark, which is obviously very important for Hyrox.
Yeah, and I think the thing that we need to realise is that it's not the same for everything we do. So that threshold, depending on how well trained we are, depends on how long we can hold that threshold for that type of movement. Like, for example, if you're a really well trained runner, your threshold ability, or the point where the accumulation goes past that line where you can't shuttle it out and use it as fuel, might be 70 minutes. But when you might not have done much bike or SkiErg or something like that, and if you could jump on that, your threshold may only be 30 minutes because you're not mechanically good enough on it. But also your body's not used to dealing with that kind of level of fatigue on that instrument, so the RPE and the other bits and pieces around it are a little bit harder. So I think it's okay saying this is the line, but that line is up and down for everything we do. Yep. It's not as clean cut as just saying lactate threshold, right? So it's hard to put a number on or quantify across something so mixed modality as what we do, which I think is important to realise.
Yeah, what do you think people get wrong about it?
I think they go too far over it because they haven't learned what it feels like genuinely. So like it's way lower than you think it is. I think most people think it's harder than what they think it is. I think they think their threshold is higher than what they can
Yeah.
actually sustain if they were holding like that line. I keep wanting to say the amount of millimole it is, but only because I think back to running and that's where it is. And it's not the same for everyone. Everyone's is a little bit, but it's an inflection point where you go from a nice steady line to, a spike and which is no longer maintainable. So if you do that and you keep going up, once you go into it though, it's very hard to come back out of it. And I think when people are doing short intervals and things like that, they can hold that kind of intensity for a short, 5 or 6 minutes, and they think they're at lactate threshold, when in fact they're probably already above it, because time your heart rate drifts up to that level, and time you can kind of just hold. We talked about it a couple of weeks ago. You can hold on for that 5 or 6 minutes because you've got a minute break coming. Whereas if you were doing it for 70 minutes, I'd pretty much guarantee the majority of people wouldn't be running that pace and that rate effort, because you just can't sustain it. So I think people need to realize that it's probably lower than what you actually think it is. You're not trying to hold on. You're trying to just work that level so that you can get better at shuttling lactate and clearing it so that you can maintain that pace for longer, so your body gets more economical and efficient at doing that job.
Yeah, I agree. I think I'd agree with that. Definitely. I think a good majority of people that when they've started with me, when we do what I do for threshold testing, they always think that they're a faster runner than what we ascertain. And like you said, a lot of people have good grit and determination and can sustain, a 5x5 at a pretty good pace because they've got that willpower. But like you said, if you'd prescribe them a 5x5, then all of a sudden you stepped in and said, look, now run for another 10 minutes, that'll blow up. So, which again is not the definition of threshold. Again, it's that maximum state that your body is just processing the byproducts of higher energy production. And that's just, and everyone feels that when you start producing more energy, you start producing that fatigue. And it's like that feeling where like, yes, there's a level of discomfort, but I can maintain this. And if you don't, if you're not performing whatever interval you're doing, we'll probably mostly talk about running because that's the most important thing for Hyrox. But whatever you do, if you were to start an interval session and the first one feels like you are just holding on for that last minute, begging, for the minute rest, and then every set is progressively harder, and then you're just really cooked afterwards. It's not an effective threshold session. You've done too much damage without really training the system that you want to train, because it's so important that you are, teaching your body how to buffer that lactate, how to shuttle that lactate into the other slow twitch working muscles, so that again it's clearing and it's just working at that rate that it can sustain for whatever duration a Hyrox race is. But for most people, it's going to be at least an hour. If you're not training the system that's going to get you through that, well, you're going to come to the race and probably run too hard the first run and then too hard in the second run, then your race is effectively over.
Yeah, like I can see why people fall into a trap as well, because then if you train like that and you think your threshold is that, you think you can start the race like that, and in the middle of the race it should feel like that, and it shouldn't, and you're already cooking yourself, like you say, and you're building up, accumulating fatigue that you can't deal with later on, and that's why we get a lot of really shitty pacing jobs in Hyrox. I think that having the short runs into a station as well gives you that false sense of security as well, because you think, I just need to get through this run, then I'm at something else. Then I need to get through that, and I'm back on the run, and I need to get through that. So you can break it down into those chunks, whereas you can't with a single modality thing. You're just in that shitty grind and you've got to go for it. Whereas you can kind of cheat your way through it mentally because you've got those steps along the way. So I think definitely chilling out on people need to chill out on their threshold stuff and realize that you're training to push the system up. You're not trying to drag it up, because once you start dragging, like going above that threshold, you start turning on different pathways that we don't necessarily want to train as much for Hyrox. But you also give yourself that false sense of security false feeling that that's where you should be, and that's not where you should be. A threshold session should be relatively like controlled. I like to explain it as like comfortably uncomfortable. So you can carry on going, but you'd love to, you wouldn't mind stopping as well. But if you're fast rep and you're already breathing hard and hanging on, you're above threshold, and you're teaching yourself the wrong thing.
I just say manage discomfort. So we're on the same page there.
Yeah, I think like I talked about it. I did a post this morning I talked about ventilatory threshold. So the last couple of months, I've been using a ventilatory threshold heart rate monitor and breathing sensor as well, just to get like a little bit of an extra feedback. I don't really use it during the sessions, use it after, but it just makes me think about it a little bit different. So lactate threshold, or whatever we want to call it. This line that we're talking about now, not the first one where it starts to build, is really linked to your vent threshold as well. So your breathing rate. So it's a really good place to learn to anchor your feelings to. So it's a really good place. RPE can go really well with your lactate threshold and your ventilatory threshold. So for me, anchoring it to that's really handy. And how you do it is slightly different for everyone. Like Jack Daniel's old way is the 2 to 2. So one breath in for every 2 steps, and then one breath out for every 2 steps. So every 4 steps, you're doing a full breathing cycle. And that's kind of, for most people, around VT2. It's really hard to do in a race because you've got so many other things going on. But in training, if you practice this kind of rhythm, breathing, you can it helps you line up your RPE and your threshold to your ventilatory state as well. So when you come off a station, it's always going to be higher because you go from being either whatever, if it's your burpees, you're lying on the floor, you're up and down, you're all over the place, breathing's not regular. When you get back on the run, it's probably going to be like a 2-1 pattern where you are breathing a little bit heavier. Your goal, and an easy way to anchor it, is to get your breathing pattern back to a nice 2-2 breathing pattern. And you can do that by practicing it in your sessions. Not so easy when you're running around and you're trying to remember if you're on lap 3 or 4 or what station's next. But if you can still hear your breathing, and you know the difference between a huffing and a puffing and a controlled breathing. And they're really good places.
You know when your breathing is controlled. You might not be able to count 1, 2, 3, 4, but you know.
And I think it's a really handy trick to use. So I always cracks me up when I start a race and we're on lap 2 of the first run and I'm overtaking people that are breathing as if they've just smoked 20 fags, or they're already cooking themselves going out the gate. On that first run, you shouldn't be breathing heavy. You could almost, your heart rate would, all right, it's pumped up with adrenaline and everything else, so you might get a higher spike than normal, but it shouldn't be up at your threshold level before you even hit the ski, because you're already starting to burn glycogen for probably only 5 seconds that you're going to save on that kilometer. If that's all, all it takes is 5 to 10 seconds faster than, or I know we're not going to call it a pace because it isn't pace, but in this circumstance, because you're fresh, we can kind of say, like, if we were 5 to 10 seconds quicker than what our threshold was for that day, you're already burning candles or matches, whatever you want to call it, early into the race because you're excited. That first run in the ski should be sub-threshold. Definitely.
Look, I think you can call it pace for the purpose of this conversation. I had an athlete two weeks ago that when we looked at his splits, he probably didn't have the race that he quite wanted to. I think his first 2 runs were a 3:36, then a 3:33 after the ski, and then it dropped back to like 3:46, 3:55. And then he said, oftentimes the typical feedback you'll get is, I think I need to work more on the sleds. It's like, no, you need to start slower. The sleds feel heavy because you are flooded with lactate. Like, you've already overcooked it. It's like, and I had this conversation, and he said, he's done very well in doubles. I said, do the sleds feel heavy in doubles? It's not a strength issue. It's how you are arriving there. And I said the same thing to him. It's probably 5 or 10 seconds, but those 5 or 10 seconds make all the difference. And it is pacing. So I'm sure if you could wear a lactate monitor and have that data, he would probably be at 7 or 8 millimoles in that first run, because he's just got that wee bit excited. And like you said, the excitement of the race, it does put your heart rate higher. So you do have to factor that in. I'm sure we'll talk in an episode about race pacing and strategy. But I think the first 2 runs in the ski of the race is really the only place you can really undo your race. I think you can, even if you have a good start and you maybe overdo 1 or 2 of the stations, I think you can pull it back because you're in a pretty good place metabolically. But I think if in that first, say, 7 to 10 minutes, if you overdo it, I think there's almost no coming back unless were to stand still for literally 2 minutes and just flush everything. But obviously no one's going to do that in the heat of the race.
Yeah. See, if you go into the sleds and your heart rate is already at your threshold heart rate or above, and then you do 2 to 3 minutes of like anaerobic work, you've sent yourself way above where you can come back from. So if you do an anaerobic effort to recover fully, you need 2 or 3 minutes. Whereas if you've done that and now you've got to go and run back at threshold pace, the only way you can sustain is by slowing right down. You're going to lose so much power output going past that after. I really think, that though, if I had to say anything, that first 10 minutes of the race should probably be more tempo than it should be threshold. You should be so in control. You shouldn't be heavy breathing because it's such a trap. And although your second run will probably always be faster than the rest of the first one's usually a different length, so we'll ignore that one. But the second run compared to 3 to 7 is always going to be faster because the ski is metabolically taxing, but mechanically it's not so bad compared to the rest of the stuff. There's no, you could get away with almost type 1 muscle fibers.
Your legs are almost fully rested for 4 minutes. You always leave the ski, pretty hot. So, well, maybe not even hot, but I'd say you leave the ski most recovered, especially in the legs, and it's early in the race. So, that's pretty typical. That the ski might, even a good race that's run very well, the ski might be 3 to 4 seconds quicker. But what you don't want to see is the ski being 15 to 20 seconds quicker than the next run, because that again, it's just a sign that you've just tipped over that LT2 marker. You've just gone far too anaerobic in your production, and then you're just constantly trying to pull yourself back, which you can't do.
Yeah. I think the ski is is a weird one because it's although it is hip hinge delivered, there's still quite a lot of upper body engagement with the pulling of the cables and the pulling through. Most of the upper body muscles have probably a higher percentage of type 2 muscle fibers, so you're probably going to get a higher level of lactate produced. So, but you've still got to shuttle that. So if you really hammer it and then you just produce silly levels of lactate, it's still going to be really hard to shuttle about, and you're probably not going to clear it in the next 3 or 4 minutes it takes to get to the sled. So I think staying sub-threshold on the ski is whatever that is for you. And we'll talk about it in another lesson session, but I think race strategy is really big, and I think couldn't really do a full session on that. But staying sub-threshold is key.
Agreed. So do you want to talk quickly about how we measure threshold, or how you can test for it, or because I think it is important, because we've probably thrown out a few terms that are worth clarifying, about lactate, LT1, LT2. Do you want to go through the sort of millimoles and those sort of things? So I think it is important.
So LT1, right? From a running perspective, we're all sat here now producing lactate, probably about 1 millimole. So not a lot. It's getting shuttled around the body. It's used a little bit as fuel, but not much because we're predominantly burning fat. But once that level starts to go normally about 1 millimole above whatever resting is, and for most people that's about 2 millimole. We call that lactate, LT1, lactate threshold level 1, whatever you want to call it. And what happens above that is glycogen starts to get burnt more than it does sat still, because anything we're doing now is predominantly fat. So it doesn't really rise sharply, but it will start to rise slowly above there. And the longer we go, the more it will rise. The next point, and the one that we're really concerned with, is that lactate term point 2. There's so many terms for it: maximum, lactate steady state, ovular, ventilatory threshold 2 I talked about, anaerobic threshold, and the terms can get all intermingled, but basically we'll just refer to it as LT2 or lactate threshold in this, because it's the one that we really care about. And for most people, it comes in at from running, it comes in at about 4 millimole, of blood lactate. People are different and it goes up and down, and it depends on the state for that day. But when you look at a normal test, it would normally get to about 4, and then it starts to really rise from there. And when you get a sharp inflection point and it starts to really rise, that's when we know its production has become higher than clearance, and that's when we'll start to fatigue because of the metabolic byproducts that are produced at the same time. So we don't want it going too far above that for too long, because then we can't recover. So we want to be in and around that point. And for training, you probably want to be in and around that feeling or level without going too far above it. And you probably, for the majority of people, are better off going a little bit below it, because if you're a little bit below it, your clearance is better than your accumulation. So that way your body gets to spend more time clearing it and getting better and more economical at lactate clearance. I know the Norwegian triathletes, the big three, when they test most of their sessions, their lactate sessions, they will stop at 3.5 millimole. They don't want to go above that because they know obviously they've got massive training volumes, but if they stay around 3.5 millimole, they know they're not going to go above it. They can get good amounts of volume in without over fatiguing himself, and you get a good enough bang for buck at that level that you can come back the next day and do your aerobic stuff, and then come back the day after and do the other stuff. But I'm talking, these geezers are doing 35 hours a week of training, but they don't want to be spending 3-4 hours above 3.5, 4 millimole. But so I think we can tie it though pretty well to heart rate, and unless you get testing done, it's not 100% accurate. And I suppose you're probably better off to talk about how you use Morpheus to use that kind of window of heart rate.
Yeah, so it's a good segue. So yeah, as I'm sure people know, I rely on Morpheus. So I've spoken to Joel quite a bit. So Morpheus just has 3 zones. So there's the blue zone, green zone, red zone. And from what he's told me, basically the green zone starts at LT1, and then the end point is LT2, and then the blue zone is basically everything below that, and the red zone is above that. So there is a lot of data behind it. And to your point, whenever I coach athletes, I always get them to basically try to have their threshold sessions sitting mid-green zone. I don't see the point of trying to push every session as close to LT2, again, because you could just accumulate a lot more quality volume with less fatigue, and you just feel better after the sessions. Most guys are doing double sessions. They've got to do their strength work, 2 to 4 hours after. Having that slightly lower level of fatigue carried over from that first session with probably minimal benefit, I think serves well. Yeah, I think heart rate is obviously a proxy for energy production. Most people typically, their threshold heart rate is anywhere from maybe like 157 to 165, 164. I find that fairly typical. I have had a few athletes that sit a little bit higher, and then a few that have genetically lower heart rates, but I've always found that's a pretty safe zone. So if you can go out and run your thresholds around that, 155, 157, up to about 164. I know for me personally, it's a little bit higher. It's about that 165 to 167, but it's just because I'm heavy. But certainly for most people around a normal body weight, that's pretty typical. So if you've only got a heart rate monitor and nothing else, I'd probably say, find a pace ideally on a treadmill to start with, because you can control the pace, and then find those intervals that you're able to maintain that heart rate, that the interval, say you do 4 minutes on, 1 minute off, and that your heart rate does not, it doesn't creep up. So it basically just sits at, say, 161. And I'd say that's a pretty good way to ascertain a good starting threshold pace without having to go and get your blood work done or your lactate tested.
Yeah, I think this is, it's interesting that everyone is slightly different. And I think the bigger your aerobic base, the higher your threshold's going to be. I think mine, from a personal point of view, when I was running 100 miles a week, my ability to hold lactate threshold, I could hold 91 to 92% of max heart rate for 70 minutes, which is long, right? I couldn't do it now. So that was like 170, 171 beats per minute for me. Now that I'm doing less volume and loads of other stuff, I'm better at Hyrox, but I'm not as good at all-out runner. I could probably hold 164, 165, which is what I used to be able to hold for a marathon. So like volume and that aerobic base and running economy have a massive impact on this. So I think this is where people, I think, fuck up a little bit with going straight in with threshold stuff without having the aerobic base to deliver it. So everybody's is going to be slightly different. I think the fitter you are, the ability to hold a higher heart rate for longer, you're going to have. So I think for people that don't have a great aerobic background, you're definitely better off sitting at the lower end of your targets, like you said. The problem with that as well, and I think I talked about it a little while ago, is those first couple of reps are going to be a struggle to get your heart rate up there. But if you try and rush it up there, it will have an impact later on, because there's cardiac drift and a bit of heart rate lag to get you into that zone. So it takes a bit of practice. And I think you need to do a couple of sessions, probably a good few, to work out how to get yourself into the right RPE, heart rate and pace or whatever over the reps, so that maybe the first 2 reps, say if you're doing half hours worth, the first 10 minutes are probably going to be very low in that green zone, as you call it, whereas the rest may be mid-green zone. So what people need to realise is they don't need to rush right into being at that pace or that heart rate, because physiologically, you're still running at that pace. And your body's just catching up. You probably are producing lactate at the same type of level. And if you dropped off or you jumped off the treadmill and did a test at that point, you would probably be at 3.5 millimoles, although your heart rate hasn't quite caught up yet. And it might not catch up in the later reps for the first minute. So patience, again, with waiting for your heart rate to come up and not trying to chase it is quite important, I think.
Agreed. Yeah, I think it all just circles back to start a bit easier than you probably think. Always keep the session maybe 1 RPE, particularly when you're starting up. We've talked about this before. The most important thing is obviously training frequency, training consistency, not getting injured. You're certainly also just far less likely to get injured if you're running too hard. So there's no harm in starting if you're new to Hyrox or newish and just getting into threshold training, I just try to get a real handle on it. Like, I think we'd probably both agree that start slow and then progress. And I think RPE is a really good thing. It can take some people a little bit to learn. But I do think the breathing is great. If you are conscious of your breath and how hard you are breathing, you're definitely running too hard. And again, there's probably no harm in even the first 2 to 3 weeks of your threshold training. There's no harm in those sessions being too easy, and there probably is a little bit of harm if you're doing more VO2 training or more hard work. Again, you are probably more prone to injury, and you're just not really getting the training effect or the adaptation you want to be better at Hyrox.
Yeah, I think people just need to relax. And you're training, you're not racing, so you're practicing for the race. You're trying to get fitter so that you can do the race. You're not trying to race every week. Those sessions aren't a race. You're trying to build a foundation and a fitness level that means that when you get to race day, you can execute. If you keep slogging in training and keep hammering yourself, you're not building the right habits and you're not building the right energy systems to perform well. So you're always going to be better, like you say, being a notch under than a notch over, because you teach yourself better habits. It doesn't mean that you can't perform in a race because you've never tested yourself in training. That's not how it works. Your body will allow you to give out the right output on the day if you trust it. Yeah. And like you say, RPE does take some getting used to. Like for me now, I've been doing this so long, I could not wear my watch and have a heart rate strap on and probably tell you almost exactly what my heart rate is. I can also feel exactly when I go over my lactate threshold because I have a different feeling in my legs that I know is me going above it. It's just that little weird sensations that you pick up. So people listen to your body is the biggest bit of advice I can give to anybody. Start listening to what it's doing. Listen to your breathing, listen to what your legs are telling you, and start doing it early on because it's telling you there's something wrong or that if you're all right, because that's its job, and your brain's job is to look after you.
So we spoke about why threshold is important. It's that maximum sustainable output for call it an hour for simplicity's sake. Yeah. The goal for a lot of people is that sub 60 Hyrox. So it's obviously very relevant to the race of Hyrox because it is going to be the speed that if you run a race well, it will be threshold, but there's also limitations in the fact that it is not a single modality like a half Ironman, for example, is probably the best example of just a pure threshold race for runners. But obviously a half Ironman, people don't throw stations in the mix. So like you were talking about with that consistent sort of 4 millimolar, if you were to say, look at an athlete as they were running their race and they were at that 3.8 to 4 millimolar, then as soon as they do the ski, they might shoot up to 5 or 6. And that's obviously the complex, maybe even potentially even higher. And every station obviously brings different energy demands. And it's almost impossible to do any of the stations without some anaerobic energy production. So with that anaerobic energy production, lactate goes up. So then all of a sudden you've got this system that has to deal with that extra lactate. Like we said, obviously a well-trained aerobic system can shuttle that. But what that means is that it has to pull the pace down. So as just for the simplicity of round numbers, if your threshold pace is 4 minutes per kilometre, and that has you at 4 millimolars, if you then go on the ski and that takes your blood lactate up to 6, you cannot then sustain a 4-minute threshold pace because the extra energy expenditure is going to tip you over. So you have to drop your pace slightly. So obviously a very well-trained person, that drop is not so much, but there will be a period of time where you have to run a little bit slower, slow your cadence, and slow your foot speed down a little bit to allow you to bring yourself down to that 4 millimole again, and then you're able to sustain that threshold pace. And obviously what would happen if you were to then try to run as hard or get yourself back to that 4 millimolar, even though that may be your threshold pace when you're fresh, all of a sudden that becomes far more anaerobic, and you may be able to hold that, if you've got grit and determination, you may be able to hold that for the next run, but then all of a sudden your blood lactate's at 8 or 9, and then you hit the sled, and then fucking that's all she wrote. So that's what people need to understand, that it's this, that it's this changing physiology that you have to navigate in a Hyrox race that makes it so, I guess, fun and so fun to train for, and probably why we nerd out on it so much. So it's not this. There's what you can do in the training environment, and you can train very well for it, but then you've also got to take into account what every station does to your threshold pace and how that has to be managed and navigated through the race.
Yeah. I think that's key, that it's not one flat physiological line that you're going to dip in and out of different things. And it's a big jigsaw for how me and you could go out and race and have exactly the same finish line, but completely different splits across the whole thing. One person could have a 30-minute run total and someone have 32-minute run total, but they've attacked the stations that they suit them better. I think even when you look at the elites, there are people that are running fast. Everyone's pretty much running fast now, but some people, the stations don't take as much out of them as other people, so that they can maintain a steady rhythm throughout the whole thing. Some people are up, down, up, down, up, down throughout the race. I think it's really important just to work out what works for you. But in the whole, it's going to be staying just below or around that lactate threshold, dipping in and recovering enough so that you don't lose too much time when you come back out on the runs. The runs, they're obviously not recovery, but they're damage limitation. You need to be able to maintain a pace on the run, because it's 55, 60% of the race. It doesn't send you over the edge so that you can't put out on the stations, because there's still a big part of it. And it's so much easier to just stand still on a station than it is on running. If you're running, you're always moving forward. But if you go into a station because you've tried to hold that pace, like you said, that 4-minute pace, you won't be able to put any power out because you're already above your red line, if we want to call it that. So you can't put the power out. So you can't perform on that station. So you just leak time everywhere. You just have to be dancing along that line, in and out, taking rest on the stations where you need to. If it's not planned rest, the only real one that we've got planned rest is the sled push, right? Everything else you're kind of wanting to go forward. Whereas if you do 50 meters unbroken on the sled push, you just as well leave the arena right then. So there are planned, because of the extra anaerobic load there, you need to stop and rest and recover. So everything else, you just want to be moving forward. But if you get to the lunges and the wall balls, and then you're standing still with the bag on because you've gone way over your red line on the runs, and then the wall balls, if you arrive at the wall balls, I saw someone say hammer the run 8, and get into the wall balls, it's nearly over. It's the worst thing you could possibly do. You want to be under control so that you come back below that line so that you can output as quick as possible to get finished. So it's that balance and axe. And the whole thing is riding a wave, and that in and out of lactate threshold. So you need to learn what it feels like for you. And it's not like you said, not a physiological set point throughout the whole race. It's up and down.
It varies.
That study they did, the study they did last year, it did it on a sim, and the average time was 1:26. And so it's not, the problem with that as well is it's not continuous as well. So they were having a minute break after the stations to take the lactate, but the lactate levels were 7 to 8 millimole throughout the whole thing, which is pretty high if you think about it. And a running times, it's not going to be that high. So you can handle a higher level but you're definitely not traveling as fast. So if you were running and you were at 7 millimole fresh, you would be 5 to 8k pace, whereas in a Hyrox at that, you're probably marathon-ish pace, depending on how well trained you are. It's slower. It's most people can do a Hyrox at what I would call tempo pace, and at tempo pace at threshold effort. So that's what you're looking for. And people ask me all the time, what pace should I run at? And it's impossible to know, because we don't know if the runs are actually a kilometre. They never are. So we can't, there's no point me saying to you, it's a 4-lapper, you want to run 4 minute per K, run a minute a lap, because it might actually be, if it was it might only be 800 metres, and you might have a 150 metre, 200 metre rock zone every time in and out or whatever. You have to, chasing splits in this isn't great. What we want to do is chase the feeling, and even using the heart rate's not ideal.
No, we'll get to that because I think we can talk about sort of our training methods. So that's probably a good segue to sort of like how do you train thresholds? So I'll start. I use a mix of treadmill and track or road. So I'm a big fan of heart rate for most of the training block because it manages intensity, and I will usually start on a treadmill because you can just, like I said, you can manage the intensity more or less to the heartbeat, and you can also progress it. So we can I can look at an athlete of what they did 1 week, and if I'm happy with sort of how their heart rate is settled, or better still, if they have repeated the same workout and they've got a lower average heart rate and a lower max heart rate, then you can obviously just progress a treadmill pretty incrementally, and that way try to drive progress that way. And then now closer to a race, probably for about 4 weeks out, then I'll start to incorporate more track or road running. We still will use a chest strap to look at the data after the session. Yeah, no looking at the watch, because you have to, I've said that to athletes, you have to ingrain the feeling. And we'll start sort of maybe even 4 to 6 weeks out, because inevitably, the first or second session, they may run too fast and all of a sudden their heart rate's far, far higher. But hopefully by race day, or as close to race day as possible, they've got that race pace. And I agree with you. I've had that question more times than I care to count, that it's impossible to tell. And I tell you, okay, your race pace is 3:46. Okay, that's meaningless. Like, you can't go out and know, you're a good runner. No one can go out and just know what 3:46 is versus 3:52 or 3:44. So again, you have to have, I think, using the heart rate data early and consistently in the block to really build progression and make sure intensity is right. And then I find closer to a race, taking it outdoor, because obviously you are running outside, and then building in the feeling, and then talking to an athlete after the session. What was the RPE? How did the session feel? And then looking at the heart rate, and then usually by then people sort of get it and can start sort of becoming much more in tune with just how fast they need to run to be at a certain heart rate or a certain RPE. So that's how I've typically done it.
Yeah. We don't want that paralysis by analysis and loads of information coming in. Like I said before, that triangle for me of RPE, heart rate, and pace as a guide is pretty much going to get you in the middle of where you need to be. It takes time, but if you can take that RPE, but if you can learn from the other two, if you can train by numbers and then race by feel, I think you're in the best area. So you need to take the data you've got in training to learn how it should feel, to take it into the race. And in the race, I wear my heart rate strap, but I pretty much don't look at it because it doesn't make any difference. Before Christmas, I had a few races and my heart rate was ridiculously high because I was coming off the back of an illness. And I just ignored it anyway because I knew that it didn't match up with my RPE. So I knew I could manage higher. And then, I wore it on Saturday night for the doubles as well. My legs were telling me one thing, my heart and lungs were telling me a completely different thing. So it was completely pointless having it on. I just like to look at it after. But in training, it's really important that you match them up so that you can learn that feeling. And more, I've done 44 races. I know what a Hyrox should feel like. Whereas if you've only done 1 or 2 and it's been 6 months between racing them, you probably aren't going to know how it should feel. But you should know how threshold feels from your training, and you should have confidence that it needs to feel like that, and it doesn't feel like a 9 out of 10, because that's not sustainable. So I like to use pace as a guide. And I don't mind if they do it. Here at the minute, the weather's rubbish. So I just recommend that people do it on the treadmill because we can manage the weather. It's pretty stable temperature. There's no wind. It will change week to week. This week is about 15 degrees warmer than it was last week, and the humidity's gone up. So you need to factor that in. So that means that people need to slow down. So I give a pace window now, and then a heart rate window as well. So depending on the session, I like to do some sub-threshold stuff as well, whatever you want to call it, tempo type stuff, which means a lower pace but for longer sustained periods. Because I still think that works on a couple of different things. This is discipline and stuff, and maintaining that rhythm for a longer time, because that teaches people that if you fang it at the beginning, you ain't making it to the end. If you're doing 50 minutes at 10 seconds slower than your threshold pace, it's pretty steady away. You need to concentrate. But if you try and go out and within 5-10 minutes your RPE is at 7, you're going to be really struggling 45 minutes later. So it's a good way to learn. I do like going outside, like you say. It's different conditioning on the legs, but if it's pissing down, windy, and you're hilly, it's not the same because you'll just be things will be all over the place. So it's nice. In a Hyrox, it's pretty benign. We're indoors, like the temperature changes, but it's not windy. There's no rain, hopefully. I think wherever the track's handy for it, but if it's windy, you're always going to get smashed in the face. So it turns into a bit of a battle, and that can slow you down. For people starting, and in the winter, I recommend sticking to that treadmill. Do your easy runs outside so that you get the conditioning on your legs if you can. You know, a bit different if you're in northern Canada and it's 6 foot snow. But if you've got the ability to go outside, get the conditioning in on your easy runs, hit the treadmill for your sessions so that you can manage it a little bit better. But in the summer, if you can get outside and do it better.
Yeah, the funny thing, the only consideration for our summer is it's so fucking hot. So it's like, like that is an issue in the Australian summer. Unless you can get out, super early when it's dark, you're going to be running in 32, 33 degree weather, and that affects your output as well. So look, I don't think that there's not obviously one perfect solution. I do think a mix of both treadmill and outdoor running, and I typically agree. I think a good chunk of it on the treadmill, just again to manage that intensity. We're aiming in a training session. We're aiming for specific adaptation. So if you're running at the right intensity for the right amount of time, and then you can progress that with control, I think that's really effective. But if you're to do no outdoor running at threshold or race pace, I think it can be problematic on race day. But then, I'd suggest most people do most of their easy runs outside to build that lower limb conditioning. It was certainly something that speaking with Cole, that sort of, he felt that affected him, that he'd done no road running for the last few months because it's negative 15 degrees. It would be fairly life disorientating to run outside in the Canadian winter. And he just felt just a little bit by the lunges, which is usually really strong. He just felt more fatigue in his legs than he was used to. Sort of unavoidable in that situation. And he was lucky enough to go to Nashville and train at Proven for a couple of weeks. I was able to get a little bit of that durability into his legs, so he's feeling good.
Yeah, I always like to set a bit of an incline on the treadmill as well. Like, I know you don't prescribe it, but I do, because mainly because the belt's moving underneath you, so you're jumping up and down. And even if you put it on an incline, it's not the same as running outside. But I think it allows for a little bit more control, because I feel like if you don't have the incline on, you can put the pace up a lot. It affects your cadence so that it almost feels a little bit out of control. Whereas if you slow it down a little bit and put a little bit of an incline on, your cadence generally matches it a little bit better. So there's some studies that say that running economy is the same or less, or there's ones that say that running economy is affected in a negative manner on the treadmill. I think everyone's slightly different, and it depends on the person, like everything. And some people find the treadmill really hard because they're staring at a wall or whatever. Psychologically, I think psychologically it's harder than being outside. Theologically, I think it's probably easier, but I think you should have a little bit of incline just to match up the cadence a little bit better for me. I think it suits it's a little bit less chaotic. It's if you're running really fast, 18-20 kilometers an hour on a treadmill, that belt speed gets a little bit iffy because it's having to travel. Unless you've got a really, really good treadmill, it gets a little bit iffy. So it's probably a little bit easier to control if it's on a bit of an incline. For me, it's just if you're struggling and you feel like you're hammering it and your legs are out of control because you're running on a treadmill, slow it down a little bit and put an incline on it. You will still get the same physiological benefits if your heart rate's up. And generally, heart rate goes up faster, a little bit easier, or it goes up easier when you're on a little bit of an incline because of the gravity thing, which is different on a treadmill than it is outside, but I still think it's useful to have a little bit. And it also, for me, it doesn't give you a false sense of security because it's definitely faster on a treadmill than it is outside. I'm convinced. Yeah.
Oh, no, definitely. Yeah, I agree. Last topic we're going to touch on, threshold. So machine threshold work. What are your thoughts? What's effective? What's not?
Yeah. So over the summer, we did a lot of threshold on the bike. I think it was good to get in more. You could get more work in, so a little bit more volume without the impact. And then we moved to more running. So I think the bike in it is a really handy piece of kit to do threshold stuff on, because you can get decent volume on it with no impact. So your body doesn't know it. You don't get the mechanical efficiency, but you get the metabolic stuff. So all the clearance is still happening. You just don't get the running economy benefits. But on the upside, injury risk is much reduced. And if you're a big geezer, it's definitely, or female, then you can, doing it on the bike is definitely a safer place to do it. You still need to run because
yes,
the massive part of the race is running. You need to get that mechanical efficiency, but I think you can get a good mix if you use the bike. At the minute, or generally, I don't prescribe much more than 3K a week tempo-y threshold on the two ergs, row or ski. 3 to 4K probably is about enough. I don't think there's enough to win or enough improvement to be had on those ergs unless you're doing a massive amount of it. So we do a maintenance amount of, and I keep it threshold tempo-ish. Probably being a slightly longer interval at tempo and a shorter interval at threshold, like a K tempo, 500 meter threshold, 3 or 4 times, whatever, 2 or 3 times, whatever it is, with chunks. And at the end, it'll probably just be at the end of a strength endurance session. So in the morning, they'll do their running thresholds, then they'll do their strength endurance bit with a little bit of tempo-y threshold stuff on a machine after, followed by wall balls, obviously.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I agree on the bike. So for me personally, like I've said, I'm obviously a bigger human. So I typically would do 2 threshold running sessions and 1 threshold bike. Also, my training partner is one of my clients, and she's very fit, but like 51 and has had some niggles too. So we just find that's just better for our durability. So like Monday and Friday, we'll do threshold running, and then Wednesday is just a threshold bike. Pretty similar interval base, and that seems to work pretty well. For athletes, I'll quite often program a second, if they're doing 3 quality runs a week, usually that middle session or the last session of the week, the second session will be a threshold echo or concept 2 bike. I'm sure you found this, you do tend to get probably a little bit better stimulus from an echo unless you're well conditioned on the bike. Particularly early on, athletes just don't have that, like you're saying, that muscular endurance. A lot will fatigue in the quads before they can really get their heart rate up, which is not to say it's ineffective, but it's easy enough to just make that an echo bike session, and that usually hits the stimulus pretty well. But if someone's pretty proficient on a bike, I'll prescribe like a similar type session as you would see from running. I don't prescribe any row or ski threshold work. All of that's done on aerobic days. I've never seen the benefit. I did some stuff early when I was working with Josh, like really doing a bit more ski and row stuff, and it just didn't move the needle at all.
Yeah,
I just found if you've got finite amount of time to allocate to quality work, and obviously threshold stuff would be considered quality or intensity work, and if you've only got finite amount of hours in a week that you're dedicating to that, I just like you said, you just can't move the needle in my opinion, you can't move the needle in that limited amount of time. Before I got into Hyrox, I was sort of pretty big into the erg community. I've got some good times on the sort of ski or row, and to really move the needle on getting better at those things, you've got to basically have them as your primary modality, and spending 50, 60, 70 Ks a week to take a couple of seconds off your threshold pace or your effective threshold pace, and doing 5-10 minutes at the end of each workout, or even one threshold session, is probably not going to improve it all that much. You see the people that are just naturally good at it. Like Ronk is obviously a very good skier, but I think that's just because he's coming from a swimming background and has just incredibly well developed lats. It was funny because I used to, talking with Josh, we used to compare sort of Ronk's ski time to his row time, and Ronk's row time is still just very across the board. And Josh just grew up rowing with his dad as a coach, and he can row sort of a 1:42 in the race. So I think you've almost got close to a set point of what you come to the sport with. You might improve. I think generally, just as total capacity and fitness improves, you might improve it by a second or two. But I never thought the juice was worth the squeeze to put big blocks of rowing and skiing. And you can. I still do decent. It's not to say I don't do a good amount of ski and row volume, but I just put them on capacity days to make them a bit easier and try to create a bit of efficiency. So that's how I've typically gone about it.
That's what I have in mind. Like, apart from that one short, probably like 10 minutes worth of work at the end of a session, we have them in our longer capacity days and 3-minute blocks, but they'll be 10 seconds probably slower than race pace. And like you say, sometimes I'll put in for the people that are training twice a day, instead of having bike all the time, I'll put in an aerobic erg day where they'll just flick between or any aerobic piece of equipment for 5 to 10 to 15 minutes for an hour, hour and a half in zone 1, zone 2, just basically just to break up the monotony. But I spent a good time in 2024 maybe doing 40 plus K a week on the SkiErg, and I didn't get any better. Like, not in a race. Like, there was no point. My heart rate probably dropped 2 to 3 beats, 150 pace. So I was like, what's the point in putting all that time into because you're better off just chilling. The same with rowing. My first row back in 2022 versus what I rode on the weekend, where, like you say, 2 seconds different, but my overall capacity is better, so I can run off it better now because I've just done more of it. So I don't think that the best bang for buck is doing sessions where you're probably jumping off it and going back into running just to get used to that feeling of moving all over the place and then going back to a vertical position of running. And even when I go easy on those, like even if I ski easy for 3 minutes or row easy for 3 minutes, the first 30 to 40 seconds coming off them still pushes my heart rate up until it settles. Like, I don't know what it is. The change in modalities, just even to see on an easy thing. So when people say to me, well, your compromise running sessions are all easy during the early season phase, I'm like, yeah, but you still are learning to go from one modality to another, and there is some specificity in that. And I don't think compromise running's always got to be at that threshold pace. You do learn. That's a bit like a slightly different topic, probably something we can talk about on a different day. I think it doesn't always have to be fanging it on those machines to get improvements. People send in threshold and VO2 max and 2K sessions all the time on the ergs. I don't see much benefit to that. Like a little bit of a hand in it just to remember how it feels. Like 10 minutes a week on that kind of race pace is all I do.
So on that, what's your whinge of the week?
We kind of talked about it in the middle there, but it's back to people posting shite online. The run times across courses, there's straight up lies. How I went from 4 minutes to 3 minute 30 Ks in 8 weeks. Here's my program, where they ran 2 completely different races, and one of them was whatever, Milan, and the next one was London, where the runs in London were 800 meters. You got 30 seconds quicker on that run, on those runs, because you ran 200 meters less or whatever it is. The runs in London were probably like at tops like 820, 830 meters or whatever, and the normal one could have been 1,050 meters in a tiny rock zone. You don't know. You cannot compare run times across it, and you can also even add in the run and the rock zone together. It isn't a definite size. Like people say it's 8.7 at 8K. It isn't, because it depends on the size of the stations. My understanding is all of the intra-station areas, the run, the rock zone, need to add up to 8,950 meters, or as close as they can get it to it. When I've seen the spreadsheets that they use to produce the courses, they try and get it so close. I'm talking within like, I saw one for Hernaveen last year, and they added 0.76 meters onto each lap to make it fit. So they're pretty precise, like with what they're doing, but you just can't compare it. Like even comparing those ski, row, and the sled and the warballs, because they've got intra-station areas, you can't even compare them together, because one might be 30 meters and the other one might be 80 meters. So you're running an extra 40 meters. So you're going, I've got worse at that station. But you might not have actually. You might have just run an extra 40 meters if they're that close. If it's a minute and a half on a station, you've got better. You're winning. But like you can't compare runs between courses. You can't compare courses to courses. It's comparing apples and oranges. Just work out good places. You can obviously have a look at where you finished in your age group and percentages that way. It's a good way to see if you've improved. But basically, you just need to see how you improved from an execution point of view when you sit down and review it with yourself or the coach, whatever. But stop fucking bullshitting and telling people that you've improved 30 seconds over a kilometre per run in Hyrox because you ran a different course.
Yeah, I'll second that. I actually didn't. I had actually pretty chipper week, so I don't think I've got a whinge this week. So I'll just second yours.
So my wife said maybe we need to do a win of the week as well, as opposed to a whinge, so we're not always negative.
We'll do that next week. Very good. And what was the question we were going to touch on?
So we got a question. Someone saying they were relatively good at a double,
and
they couldn't convert to solo racing. Any reasons for it, or what are our thoughts?
I mean, you'd have to look at their doubles times versus their solo time and what that gap was. I think the low hanging fruit would be pacing. Obviously, doubles is a bit more forgiving that you actually get that good chunks of rest. Even if you run the first run far too fast, there's a good chance you'll get, depending how you split your ski up, 30 to 45 seconds of rest. That's a good chunk of rest. Doubles is certainly more forgiving in the fact that you get total standing rest. So of course you can spill over in a doubles race and run far too fast, but it's certainly a little bit more forgiving that if you're a little bit too fast on anything, you've probably got some leeway to be able to claw that back. So yeah, again, I'd have to see how good they are, but assuming they're around that 53 to 55 minute mark at the doubles, which is a pretty solid time, and that maybe they were sort of 10 to 12 minutes slower in singles, you'd probably say it's again what I spoke about earlier, that pacing issue that they just can't get the first two runs in ski right. I do think that is the most important part of the race. Like I said, I think it's really the only place in the race, other than say if you fall apart in the wall balls, where you can really undo your race. Like again, you can even if you start the race well and maybe push the sled a little hard, I think you can pull yourself back from that. You can stand a bit longer, you can shake your legs out. But if you overdo it and you go too glycolytic and too anaerobic in that first 10 minutes, it's effectively ended your ability to have a good race. You might be able to grind through it, but it'll be fucking horrible, and you're just not going to run your best race because you're constantly going to be fighting those anaerobic surges that have just put you far too far over where you should be too early in the race. That would be the low hanging fruit. Would be, I think, it's probably just a pacing issue. You might think you're a 58 minute solo, and maybe you're a 62, which is still very respectable. Because you ran a 50, 53 or a 54 in your pro doubles, that you should comfortably go sub 60, and it's just not the case. I've seen a lot of people that are even sort of 106 to 108 solo guys that can get pretty decent times at 55, 54 minute mark, because it is so much more forgiving in the terms of total rest that you can get. So it's probably just go a little bit slower, perhaps be a bit more realistic with where you are as a solo athlete, and I don't want to say lower your expectations, but be realistic with where you actually are as a solo athlete, not where you think you are. That's probably the bit of advice I'd give.
Yeah, I think it's going to be, apart from pacing, you're going to look at a capacity issue, because you're obviously dependent on what you're doing on the stations. If you're splitting it 50-50, it's still a decent chunk of rest. Mentally, you can just, wall balls, you just hand the ball over, lunges, you hand the bag over. It's going to be a capacity thing, because you probably don't have the durability to withstand a full race. You probably got the ability to withstand a high threshold, but then you can't maintain it because you don't have any rest, or the rest's forced, and then nothing's when you're resting in a solo, nothing's happening. When you're resting in a doubles, you're still making forward progress in the stations, because stuff's still getting done. Yeah, so I think you probably want to look at your aerobic capacity. How long are your workouts going out to? How far? Like, what part of the race you're falling apart? If your first half's pretty decent, but and you've paced it okay, in the second half you do fall apart, then it's going to be an overall capacity thing, and you want to start pushing your workouts longer and probably training easier than harder, so that you can get more volume in, so that you can build that aerobic capacity up. Because after pacing, that's the only thing that's really going to stop you. But there's nothing we can do.
I guess unless there is a real
lunatic
station limitation, which is unlikely, but theoretically, if they're a person that's, say, a very, very light individual, and they're able to get through a little bit of a sled push and have their partner help it, but I doubt that would be the case. That unless maximal strength is a real issue and they're able to sort of get away with it because they've got a strong partner and they've run a good time, I don't see that being the case. I think what you said is probably most true. It's just an overall capacity issue and again, I think that comes back to similar to what I said, that they think their capacity has them at a 58, their capacity has them at a 64. So, as you said, keep building that capacity, keep getting a little bit faster, but just be a bit more. Just be patient with what you want to do with your career and your racing career, and the results and the progress doesn't come slowly, but if you're consistent with it, it will come. And just manage your expectations around that.
Cool. All right. Well, I think we could over an hour there, so we wrap it up there, and then we'll come back next week for another one.
Give people an excuse to do some more volume. If we make the episode 70 minutes, people will stay on the bike for 70. So if anything, we're doing everyone a favour.
Yeah. bang for buck. All right, mate. Good speaking to you. I'll speak to you later.
We'll start doing Joe Rogan length episodes eventually, mate, so we can get so Charlie can get through one session on the stairs with us.
All right, cool. I'll speak to you later, mate.
See you, mate.
Bye.